Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the last session before we head back to the main rooms after afternoon tea. Usual reminders, make sure your phone's on silent if you don't mind, and remember to rate the sessions using the AusCERT2017 app. For the last session before afternoon tea, we've got Paul Cooney with what sounds like going to be an absolute firebrand on privacy. So if everyone would like to welcome Paul to the stage.
Firebrand, thank you for that. There was a quote recently from the NHS in the UK, the health secretary there, a guy called Jeremy Hunt, and he was being asked about the hack in the UK. Now this is a hack we've talked about for the last 2 days, so I'm not going to talk about the actual how it was done or anything else. But what he actually said was that users are stupid. So this is the health secretary of the UK shunning all responsibility and saying, really, it's up to the users. My worry is this: shouldn't users have a reasonable expectation of privacy? Shouldn't users have a reasonable expectation of privacy and security? It's a $73 billion industry. Yet all the costs of any hacks fall on the victims. If the NHS had gone out and bought a fleet of ambulances, and when they received the ambulances, they took one out and a wheel fell off because it hit a pothole, do you think that they would just accept that? Or do you think they would sue the company who sold them the ambulance? But in the security industry, not only would that be accepted, but then the security industry would go back and say, oh, by the way, we want some more money because, you know, we've got to repair that wheel. So you owe us some money for that. And then another security vendor would come along and say, oh, by the way, we'll have to do your wheel balancing. So that's a bit more money, please. No other industry could get away with this. My worry is that there are so many implications to privacy these days, and that so many of these implications are coming from bodies who don't know enough about the tech that sits underneath them. In other words, there's a lack of understanding from top down as well. An example might be the NBN. So this is what I'm talking about, really, the blame game. In America at the moment, there's a very interesting lawsuit taking place, and it's all about the First Amendment, and it's Amazon. And Amazon sells some equipment called Echo, which has a voice assistant called Alexa. Now, you could almost call this the Amazon murder mystery and really have some fun with it, because the way it works is that this kit has a wake command, and when it hears that, it will then start recording whatever is going on. So in this particular murder, there is some suspicion that up in the Amazon cloud somewhere is information directly pertaining to the innocence or guilt of these particular parties. Now, you'd think, well, that's easy, isn't it? Surely Amazon will just cough up and provide the information. But Amazon are refusing. Now, it's very easy to criticize Amazon and say, well, they've got it all wrong. They should just cough up this info. We need to know if there's a killer out there or not. But Amazon, in some ways, are actually being right, because, of course, American law is set by precedent, and this is a First Amendment issue. So if they allow it once it's in precedent, what happens next time? So it's a convoluted, complex issue. There is no straightforward answers, and I'm not here today trying to say there is any one answer. I am going to suggest a starting point, and really that's what this entire speech is going to be about. There's no easy answer, but let's at least start thinking about it and start talking about where we can start trust and how we're going to do it. This is quite amusing in a way. Yeah, the police pay off ransomware operators, not for the first time either. Now, there's loads of things you could talk about here. You know, why would the police pay off? Surely this is anti-privacy and so on. And also, when they're paying off ransomware, how do they know? Is there any guarantee? You know, I've just got ransomware on my machine. Where's my guarantee saying that if I pay my 300 bits in bitcoins or whatever, that you're going to be a good scout and you're going to release it for me? There's no information about that. So we don't know. We know that sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But this isn't Uber. This isn't Uber where I can then complain and say, that taxi driver didn't drop me at home, so I'm not really very happy about it. I know I'm sorry about being sick in the back of the car. It's not that simple. Yet parts of the dark web are. So maybe that's where we are going to go. There's particular websites out there, which I'm going to show you on a video shortly, which sell a lot of drugs, as well as a lot of everything else, lots of ransomware and various keys and whatever. And if you go onto the forums and you go on regularly enough and your name gets spotted, which mine has, then you get offered free samples. So I get offered free samples of Coke, for example, which I just find quite odd in this today. So police are paying off ransomware. All right. So a company called Bromium, who I'll talk about a bit more later, they did a study where they found out that something like 10% of security professionals, people like ourselves, have at some point paid off ransomware. Well, that's quite interesting because, you know, how would you do it? You're in the office, you've got ransomware. I mean, are you just going to, on the quiet, hope that no one notices when you pay it and then cross your fingers that, you know, there's a guarantee and they'll actually release all my encryption? Do you use your company credit card? You know? Do you have an argument with all the other guys about whose credit card we should use? Another fact came out last week from The Guardian in the UK saying that the latest attack, the WannaCry attack, only something like 100 people had actually paid it so far. Well, that's a bit of a disparity, isn't it? On one hand, we're saying 10% of security professionals not only pay ransomware, but they keep quiet. And then we're saying that only this dribbles, very small amount of people have actually paid it. No one knows the truth again, and we probably will never get to the bottom of it. But before we go any further, I thought I would play some music, play a little bit of a video for everyone. And it's a video that will give you an idea of just how easy it is to actually buy ransomware and how you get it. So the purpose of that wasn't to frighten everyone and get us all panic-stricken about going for a coffee, especially in Australia. But nevertheless, it was interesting because so much of that was actually so easy to do. I did it as a video for a specific vendor who wanted me to just demonstrate how someone can just go out, find out about hacking, how to do some hacking, and get hold of some malware. The malware you see me buying there is a variant of Zeus, which has been talked about quite a lot over the last day or so. And it was a non-signature based version. And when I received it, I checked it, and that is true. There was no signature. So theoretically, it should have got through most firewalls. And especially seeing as firewall companies don't share their signature information at the moment, which is something I'll circle back to later. But nevertheless, that's the answer to the question of why last week's global cyber attack was just the beginning, because it's quite easy now. Everyone in the room related to security, I bet you've all been asked questions over the last week or two about who was behind those attacks and so on. And the answer is we don't really know, and we probably won't know. You know, it might have been North Korea. North Korea could probably scrabble together half a dozen laptops in the entire country, but they don't need the laptops because they can just go out and they can do ransomware as a service. For half a Bitcoin, which is about $800, you have your malware. You don't have to be a techie, you don't have to do the maths, it's all provided for you. $800, $900 for all of that. So, relatively straightforward. The difficult part is delivering it. So in that video, I deliberately obfuscate how the delivery would be done because I didn't really want to give just too much away. But nevertheless, it wouldn't have been that difficult. So here we are, we can do it. So let's go back to operator error. This is where I live, not in the beautician, but we live just around the corner. I think my wife might live there. But we go there a lot, and we're very good friends with the lady who runs the business. And it's not a one-man band, it's a successful business. It's gone for about 15 years. And what I'm finding now is that security is just everywhere. Everyone knows about it, everyone talks about it. And I'm known in where we live as someone who works in the industry, so you regularly get asked a lot of questions. So when some of the ransomware went out and I made the mistake of going for a coffee again, I bumped into people asking me about it, and one of the people I met was the lady who runs this business, Anna. And I quickly checked with her, how did it go, did you get caught? And she'd got the ransomware. And she said, yeah, it wasn't a problem, as she sipped away at her latte, because I back up all my stuff, I keep it offline, so yeah, I got the ransomware, but not a big deal. You know, I re-imaged the machine that got the ransomware and, you know, no problem. But isn't that a fantastic juxtaposition? You've got one-man bands, as it were, who can run their own systems so well that they don't get caught. And then you've got the NHS, where you've got the wheels falling off the ambulances. You know, it's a real mix-up out there. So the reason I wanted to talk about this one is that there was a stat I saw recently that 60% of businesses go under about within 6 months or so after having a major hack. And I read that stat, and I'm not a lover of stats anyway, but 60% of them seemed way too high to me. You know, how could that have been? But then you look at a business like this and you say, yeah, I can see how that would have happened. If that malware had got in, if she had not been able to get her files back, how would she have paid her suppliers? How would she have known who her customer list was? Everything would have been lost. So this is real life. This is right in front of us. It isn't just the Department of Defense. It isn't just GCHQ, my old colleagues. This is all of the people in the room, and it's all of our family and friends. It's our children as well that we've got to protect against all of this. We're talking about IoT, and IoT is so big now, there's now different categories of IoT. Alexa, that I mentioned earlier on, Amazon's Alexa, has just been bought by both Ford, Samsung and Whirlpool. So my washing machine is going to be capable of having a conversation. I'm not quite sure what that would be about, but nevertheless, it's not something, you know, where does that hit with your privacy again? How far does this go? So here's another scary one. And I don't want to spend all 40 minutes doing fear, uncertainty and doubt. I really don't. There's ways out of this. We just have to be a lot more sophisticated about how and where we go with this. So the Guardian's view on Google's NHS issue is quite an astonishing little story. Can I ask, has anyone in the room heard about this issue, about the NHS giving away records? I imagine no one has, unless they, you know. The story is very straightforward. Google is doing some research at the moment with some research universities in America, and they wanted some records to start looking at the data and see what was going on. So they emailed the boss of the NHS Trust in North London and said, just told them that story. He said, you know, so do you mind if we have some of your records? And the NHS went, yeah, sure, mate, no worries. And they provided 1.6 million people's records to Google. No security whatsoever, no checks, just, there you go, mate, 1.6 million records, enjoy yourself. So when this was discovered, a whistleblower, of course, was involved and sort of went, hang about. So when this was discovered, various people got involved again, including Jeremy Hunt and others. And they started throwing around these big threats against Google, saying, you know, this is a big privacy issue, and if we fine you, then you know, you're going to deserve it because you've been bad. So they threatened to fine Google the massive sum of £500,000. Yeah, that'll teach them. Just a quick bit of maths, 1.6 million records, right? So effectively they're saying those records are worth about 30 English pence each. What would you sell that for on the dark web? You know, thousands. It's an astonishing mistake for anyone to have made. Google, of course, argued that they needed the information for DeepMind, but it would be fair to say that it's legally inappropriate and almost certainly unlawful what happened there. 500,000 as a fine, that's about 4 minutes of Google's ad revenue. So these are the areas where, in terms of privacy, we've got a lot of problems and a lot of things that we need to talk about. When we talk about privacy being unveiled, I really want to start talking about how do we get on the front foot? Because so far, all I've done is be extremely negative. We've got problems here, problems there. You've got toys that are being sold now, which children can use. They can speak to the toy, they can get chat back. That was a doll that was sold in Germany that's now been taken off the market, but undoubtedly will come back at some point. So it's everywhere. How are we going to do this? How are we going to start controlling any of these issues? How are we going to control what is private, what we say is private, and the security around the same issue? So I've got this up on the board, and it's for a definite reason. Privacy unveiled. HP hardens their elite boot protection with SureClick. Just happen to have one here. No coincidence. Now, SureClick isn't something I particularly want to discuss in any great depth, and nor are any of the other vendor solutions. But the reason this one caught my eye was because at least it was front foot. It wasn't reactionary. It wasn't saying, hey, guys, you know that latest WannaCry that happened? I can fix that for you. It was trying to stop it happening in the first place. Now, you could argue that the vendors in the security industry don't really want that. They want to be reactionary because that way, of course, as vendors, they can sell more product and so on and so on. Not to mention the professional services, which tend to be very expensive in security as well, and the specialisms. So it's big business, $73 billion business. So you could argue that the security industry itself would be quite happy with this posture of reactionary. Just wait till something happens, fix it. My argument would be that we have to start changing that attitude completely, because if the security industry does not change that attitude, the security industry's attitude will be changed. In other words, there'll be external forces that will encourage this to happen. You've got a company like HP here today at a security at the AusCERT. They're here because they can start arguing this front foot defence. And I think you're going to see much, much more of this. So let's spread the argument. I was, on Monday last week, I had to go into St Vincent's Hospital, which is in, it's the Garvan Institute. You may have heard of it. It's one of the biggest oncology units in Australia, if not the biggest. And I was there because I had to watch someone go through chemo. Not the most pleasant way of spending a day, I can promise you. When we arrived, we got shown through to a security area, and a very, very competent nurse came up to us and introduced herself and explained what was happening, and we went and sat down. And she was using a HP laptop on a movable trolley, and she came up to us and started doing all the skull cooling and all the fairly horrible stuff. And I was asking her about it because it was the weekend after the NHS hack. And so I was saying to her, what do you think of this? You know, how do you feel about the fact that, you know, already the UK government's minister is saying it's users, it's their fault, they're stupid. And her reaction was interesting in that she was reasonably annoyed about it, but she said, look at this. And she opened up her personal account, her work account, should I say, sorry, not a personal account, her email account, and she showed it me. And she said, so you work in security, so Mr. Cleverclogs, you tell me which one of these I can click on and can't click on. And her email was full, and every single one of them looked official. You know, every one of them was from the Garvan Institute, or it was from the Kinghorn Cancer Institute, or it was from Dr. Deere, or they all looked very efficient, very clinical, and so on. And she clicked on a few of them. Every single one of them had links in them. Some of the warnings this poor lady was receiving were actually saying to her, don't click on links, click on this link below to find out why you shouldn't click on links. Just bizarre stuff going on. And as she was saying quite rightly, how can she be expected under those circumstances to start knowing what's right and what's wrong? And how can we have the ministers who are responsible for this actually pointing the fingers at these users and trying to put the blame on them? It's wrong, and that's really what we've got to address as the security industry. We've got to start addressing that. The responsibility is ours as much as anyone else's, and as I've already warned, I think if the security industry doesn't wake up to this and doesn't start becoming more proactive, then there is serious danger that external forces will start pushing the security industry. And by that I do mean government forces. So, some straightforward facts. 71% of breaches are aimed at the endpoint. 84% of attacks are aimed at the applications. Okay. We know that the WannaCry was in emails, and it was a link. So that's where this intrigued me with HP, with their SureClick. So I looked into it a little bit. And I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on this, not at all. But the way it works is that it's all based on Bromium, and Bromium use hardware-based security. So this is the paradigm shift that we're talking about. The paradigm shift is not just the industry itself changing and having more and more vendors populating it, but it's also about the changes in how and what we secure. If all of the attacks are at the application layer, if the attacks are at the endpoint, that gives us some really good lines as to where we should be trying to defend. This example, SureClick. SureClick's brand new, it's only been out a few months. So if this lady, when I'm at in this chemo unit at Kinghorn, if she had had this technology, it may or may not have stopped the problem if she was attacked. I don't know, it may not have done. But it at least made me think, hey, at least that's on the front foot. At least that gives us a chance. At least it's a starting point. Maybe we can mushroom from that. Maybe we can say that if we know that that's relatively secure, what else can we build from there? How else can we go sideways and upwards? What else can we bring in? What other layers of security can we start looking at? The zero trust model. I'm sure everyone in the room's heard of the zero trust model. It's something that always makes me think that whoever designed that model must have had a particularly nasty divorce. I'm not going to trust anyone. And you can see why in security. You know, how do we start doing our frameworks? How do we start saying what we can or can't trust? Can we control below the OS? Well, the firmware, the BIOS. What about persistence? Can we in some way remove or be careful of what changes are being made to our underlying systems? Can we detect from inside the OS? These are all very difficult things. They're not straightforward. And then the recovery, this idea of a golden copy. Well, I'm going to use HP as the example again, because Sure Start, it does do that. It provides the BIOS with a golden copy. But moving it outside of that, we can also start thinking about things like Sdlc, software development life cycles. And this is really where I want to go. This idea of building in and designing in security, not bolt on. And that comment does apply to the security industry, because the security vendors could argue they're not in a position at the moment to design in security. Surely that's the job of the network architects, the solution architects, and so on. I believe all of these things are starting to mix together. We no longer can have a specialist who can just do everything. Even in security, having a specialist who is a perimeter security specialist, hunky-dory, good on you, very nice, but how would they work in identity management? Again, security is growing so much, it's growing so fast. More and more vendors are coming in. So we've got to start looking at moving away from the traditional bolt-on solution methodology. We've got to move away from the idea of reacting to a WannaCry ransomware by releasing a patch. It's got to be more front foot. It's got to be more about stopping that problem beforehand. And that means designing in the security. Trust starts here. So again, there's parallels. I'm finding as a security consultant, more and more companies are coming to me now before they've got a problem, because they want to talk about what could they do about this issue. Should they be having security engineers sitting with their software development people at the start of a project? When they're designing an application, should someone like me be sitting there? When you're doing IoT, should the security people saying, I know, let's not use the password 1234. These are all possibilities, and they're all ways of moving the conversations on and embedding ourselves. Trust's got to start somewhere. If we can start our trust from the BIOS, from the OS of my specific laptop, because it's got issues about hardware-based security, well, that's a starting point. And I'm not trying to say that's the end. I'm not trying to say, hey, here we go, guys, that's the solution. There's lots of other layers of solution that we can put on top of this. But I believe it's a good start. Because otherwise, where do we start? Do we look at the network? Do we look at the perimeter? Well, we haven't got a perimeter anymore. We all know that. We all know that Checkpoint, Palo Alto, all of these companies now have mobile device management. They have VPNs, SSL VPNs and other built in. So we know that our issues around authentication and encryption are much broader than that now. Look at ICS, look at SCADA. Hardly any encryption, hardly any authentication. I want to tell you a very scary but true story. Before Christmas, I was invited by a government body who I can't name, because if I did tell you who it was, you'd never go and talk to them again. You'd never use their services. They wanted me to do a sanity check of their networks. So you go and have a look at this body, and it's largely SCADA. So they've got SCADA-based systems, control systems. And the first thing you do as a consultant is get a feel for it. You get a pie chart, you know, how much data is flowing, how much is internal, how much is going external, how many internet-facing apps have they got, how much is encrypted, how much is being bypassed. in this particular government body, 60% of all of their data bypassed their proxy. So 60% of all of their HTTPS bypassed their proxy. A few knowing smiles then. If you took a slice through the internet, about 60% of the traffic is these days encrypted. So it's about right, 65% is probably going to be SSL, which doesn't exist anymore, so it's probably going to be transport layer security. It's going to be encrypted in some way. So what was happening was this particular government body had privacy issues. They had people who worked at their environment in their SCADA systems and otherwise who were saying, when I'm at work, I do online banking. And because I do online banking, I'm a bit concerned that these security people will see my password and they'll see how much money I haven't got in my account and so on. So, you know, a genuine issue. So someone like myself gets involved and says, well, that's okay, but what about the Balancing Act? Because you've got really sensitive control data here. You've got people's lives in your hands, potentially. You're a government body, you know, you're running infrastructure. So we've got that balance happening. We've got bodies saying privacy will overrule anything else. Now, that particular scenario, most of the people in this room, I think, would know how to solve that. The way you do it is you categorize. You spend some time looking at your traffic. You work out what is online banking. You prove that I am not actually able to see your password when you do online banking. So yes, you have to spend some effort. You have to make some work, do some work. Once that work is done and you've spotted that 2.5%, whatever it might be, is that, then you start combing through the other traffic. But what you don't do is say, hey, I'm a bit worried about privacy, so I'm just not going to look at 60% of my traffic. So again, this is where the security vendors have got to start stepping in and trying to explain how this can be done. And some of it might be subtle, but that's how we've got to start building this trust into the models. Software security. We know it isn't enough. We've already named some of the percentages, and I'm not going to drown you with any more facts and figures. So if we start with zero trust, we can mushroom out from there. Forget about software security. We know software is insecure. So if we're going to go down the software security path, we've got to do it by designing in security, by having proper software development life cycles where security people are involved from the beginning. And yes, I probably sound like I'm trying to push security to be even bigger than it is currently. Maybe that's what will happen. So, the way I'd like to leave this conversation is just with these ideas that the security industry is changing. Not just because of money, not just because it's 73 billion and people are looking at saying, hey, I want to make money out of that, but because it's becoming ubiquitous. Everyone's involved in it. Anyone here who's got children will be undoubtedly very worried about some of the privacy issues that are coming up. We've got ideas about how to move forward. We've got companies that are producing new technology with things like micro-virtualization, where it's hardware-based. That's the paradigm shift that I'm beginning to see out there. Move away from software-based security, which we know has flaws. Move onto the front foot. Start designing the networks with security in mind. Start buying equipment that satisfies those security needs before it becomes a problem. That's the paradigm shift that I think is coming. Thank you very much.
We've got a couple of minutes for questions, and I've got a quick one for Paul. Everything you've said around microvirtualization is great, but that's all treating the symptoms. How do you suggest we solve the problems, which is, I'm assuming, the vendors or the software itself or the systems that we're trying to use?
Yeah, great. I had a funny feeling that you might come up with a good question. One of the things I'd really like to see, and people in the room aren't going to like this, but something I would love to see is vendors working together. So I mentioned earlier on this idea about Uber. You know, why has Uber been such a success? It's because if I have a bad trip, I can complain about it. It's not like in the old days of having a taxi and I just had to grin and bear it. And not just Uber, we're seeing that with other industries, this idea of the commons, if you like, of being able to complain and basically get what you want. I would love to see that happen in the security industry. I would love to see some of the vendors start working together so that this happens. Vendor A finds some new malware. Rather than vendor A saying, we found this new malware, we're going to keep quiet about it and we're just going to distribute the fix to our own customers. I want that to stop. I want that vendor to be able to go to somewhere, perhaps some kind of central repository, where they say, hey guys, we're the first vendor who have found this bit of malware, and put it up so that other vendors can distribute the patch as well. Now, the argument against that, of course, is going to be money. But if we can get the vendors who are actually finding these problems and they patch them in real time and then we distribute it properly, in other words, they all start sharing and treating security as a commons as opposed to just about money, that would be a good start. No one's throwing anything at me, so that's good.
Well, I was actually more specifically, there's already information sharing networks out there and a lot of vendors are actually playing in that space. I was more considering the fundamental premise of, given the talk was predominantly about privacy, around how the vendors actually treat customer data and potentially the zero trust network and how they might fix that. But that's probably a much longer discussion than a simple question. Are there any other questions? Oh well, I hope everyone can help me thank Paul for his thought-provoking presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Remember to use the AusCERT2017 app to rate the session and enjoy afternoon tea.